Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a really thought-provoking idea that maybe a lot of what we think of as our unique self-directed lives isn't really that self-directed at all. That it's actually heavily influenced, maybe even dictated by these invisible social scripts.
Yeah, it's this idea that maybe we're acting less like, the main characters charting our own course.
And more like NPCs,
yeah.
non-player characters in a game.
Exactly. Just following some kind of pre-written code. And it's fascinating because it really challenges our gut feeling about autonomy, doesn't it?
It really does.
We'll be looking at some pretty solid empirical evidence suggesting our thoughts, our choices, our actions.
Yeah.
They're way more predictable, more conformist than we probably like to admit.
So that's our mission today. Unpack these maybe uncomfortable facts. Confront how much freedom we really have, using everything from classic psych experiments to modern data mining. Prepare to ask yourself, am I truly thinking for myself? Or am I just running a program? Okay, so let's dig into this core idea first. This notion that our confidence in our own autonomy, it might be largely an illusion.
Right. The source material argues that almost every part of human life follows these predefined social scripts, conditioned by culture, right from birth.
But why? Why are we so wired to follow?
Well, if you think about it from a bigger perspective, humans are fundamentally social creatures. And back in our evolutionary history, fitting in wasn't just nice, it was crucial for survival.
Ah, okay. So not conforming could mean ostracism, or worse.
Exactly. The price of being different has always been potentially very high. So sticking to the script became sort of a survival mechanism. It explains a lot about why we tend to conform.
It feels like we carry this source called it an internal peanut gallery.
Yeah, I like that term.
This constant imagined audience judging every little thing we do, and this invisible code dictates so much how we dress, talk, learn, work, even who we love or what we dream of achieving.
And that ties directly into social roles, right? A social role is basically a set of expected behaviors for a given situation or group. You act one way as a student, another as a friend, another as an employee.
Right, you switch between them.
You switch. And the key thing is, almost everyone in a culture knows the script for these roles. How a student should act, how a server should act.
And it's weird because you weren't explicitly taught most of them, were you?
No, not usually.
You just picked them up, absorbed them from all these subtle cues around you, like getting into an elevator.
Oh, perfect example.
You just automatically face forward, stand quietly, nobody tells you to.
Or a funeral. To use hushed tones, be respectful. These are just everywhere, these cultural scripts.
And our personalities, they just seem to mold themselves to fit.
It's quite amazing how malleable we are. It's just compare how you act at, say, a casual family barbecue versus a formal work presentation. You effortlessly slide into different masks, like an actor playing parts.
And it's so culturally specific, too. The sources point out, like, a Western student sits quietly, takes notes, but elsewhere, the script might involve standing when the teacher enters, or maybe more interaction.
Exactly. Psychology even talks about scripts for whole sequences.
Yeah.
The going to a restaurant script,
Yeah.
the job interview script.
Right.
And if you're suddenly in a situation where you don't know the script, that's when you feel awkward, anxious.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And because they're so baked in, so much of our day is just autopilot. Those standard greetings, hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks, you. Even if you're not fine.
Precisely. Predictable, regardless of real feelings. Even when people try to rebel, often they end up following another script, like the rebellious teenager script.
Oh, right. Conforming to nonconformity.
It's a bit of a paradox.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The elevator experiment. I think I saw that on Candid Camera years ago.
Oh, yeah, the classic.
Where the actors all turn and face the back wall.
And the unsuspecting person just stands there for a second, looking confused.
And then nervously turns around too, even though it makes no sense.
It's such a simple, trivial thing, but it says so much about that powerful, silent pressure to just go along with the group.
Yeah.
Even when the script is totally arbitrary.
And this isn't just elevators, right? It scales up.
Absolutely. It scales up to what you could call life scripts. Think of it, the typical path. School, maybe college or uni. Start a career in your 20s. Find a partner. Marriage in your mid-20s or 30s.
Kids, work, retire around 60-something.
Exactly. Statistically, it's remarkable how many people follow that broad outline. Like in the U.S., something like 86% of women become mothers by their late 40s. It fits that culturally pushed nuclear family model.
And if you deviate too much, society kind of nudges you, lets you know you're off script.
You feel the pressure.
Even our aspirations, what we want in life, wanting a good job, a house, kids, that feels personal, but it's so deeply shaped by our culture.
Even the alternative scripts, like the free-spirited world traveler, become their own kind of archetype, their own script. It's hard to escape fitting into some kind of mold.
So, okay, if we're playing these parts, how does the programming actually happen? How do we end up like this?
Well, the process starts incredibly early, like basically at birth. It's called enculturation.
Enculturation.
It's the process where we learn and internalize all the norms, values, and behaviors of our society.
A newborn baby doesn't know anything about culture, obviously.
Exactly.
No.
Blank slate in that sense. But fast forward a few years, and they're acting in ways totally consistent with their environment. It's this comprehensive programming through social learning, watching, copying, getting feedback.
So the first programmers are family caregivers.
Absolutely. Through nonverbal cues, the language they use, teaching basic manners like please and thank you, even seemingly small things like dressing babies in blue or pink starts encoding gender scripts right away.
Wow, so by the time you even get to school,
thousands of these cultural rules and assumptions are already inside you. And the crucial part is they don't feel external. They feel like your own wants, your own personality.
And then school adds another layer, punctuality, obeying rules.
Yep. Then media bombards us with values, religion, friends. They shape our tastes, how we talk. By the time we're adults, our whole way of thinking is so steeped in our culture's assumptions, we barely realize other ways are even possible.
It's like the culture writes the initial code for our minds.
That's a good way to put it. Children just soak it up. Don't run around naked. Say hello. Take turns.
And they learn through correction.
Right. Positive and negative feedback. There was an example in the source about an 11-year-old girl feeling happier wearing certain clothes because the popular kids wear them. That's a perfect snapshot of internalizing norms to gain acceptance.
And it's not just external feedback, is it? There's this internal aspect, too, the looking glass self.
Ah, yes, Charles Cooley's idea. It's powerful. We basically build our sense of self based on how we imagine others see us. We have this imaginary audience playing in our heads from a very young age.
So when I'm thinking about doing something, I'm subconsciously running simulations. Like, what would they think?
Pretty much. You anticipate reactions, feel pride or shame before you even act. This internal audience, this mirror, keeps us rowing in the same direction as everyone else. Our thoughts are constantly being policed by this anticipated judgment.
And research backs this up, that we really internalize these views.
Oh, definitely. We adjust our behavior constantly to avoid criticism or get approval, like deciding not to share a different opinion at work because you can just picture the eye rolls.
Yeah, dumb that.
That's self-censorship to fit in, and it creates this loop. You get the approval, the behavior gets reinforced, and eventually you might even forget you changed your behavior for others in the first place.
Is there brain science on this?
There is. A fascinating fMRI study back in 2005. They had people do a visual task, and when participants conformed to what the group incorrectly said, the areas of their brain linked to perception actually changed.
Changed, as in they literally saw it differently.
It appeared that way.
Yeah.
As if the social pressure altered their actual perception.
Whoa. And what about resisting?
When participants resisted the group and gave the correct answer, there was increased activity in brain areas tied to emotional distress. The amygdala lit up.
So going against the grain actually feels bad on a neurological level.
It seems so. Defying the group triggers anxiety. Conformity feels rewarding. Nonconformity sets off alarms.
And this internal monitoring can lead to weird situations, right? Like pluralistic ignorance.
Yes, that's where basically everyone privately disagrees with something, but they think everyone else agrees, so nobody says anything, and the norm continues.
Like the classic example of college drinking. Everyone thinks everyone else is super comfortable with binge drinking.
Right, so they join in to fit in, even though many might secretly feel it's too much. Nobody wants to be the odd one out who speaks up.
Okay, and what about cringe? That feeling of secondhand embarrassment.
Vicarious embarrassment. It's so strange, isn't it? Why do we physically wince when someone messes up singing the national anthem? It's on us.
Right, but you feel it.
Psychologists think it's like social pain by proxy. Our brains are so wired for social connection that watching someone break a social norm activates similar regions as if we were experiencing social pain or rejection ourselves.
So our brains treat social screw-ups almost like physical threats.
To some extent, yes. It likely comes from our evolutionary past where social rejection could be a death sentence. So we develop this hypersensitivity to anything that threatens social standing. That internal audience is constantly trying to keep us safe by keeping us in line.
Okay, saying we follow scripts is one thing, but
Yeah.
how far does it actually go? Social science has some pretty stark demonstrations, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Some really chilling experiments that show just how ready we are to ditch our own judgment.
Like, would you ignore what you clearly see just because everyone else says something different?
That's exactly what Solomon Asch tested in the 1950s.
Yeah.
His conformity experiment. It was simple. Participants had to match the length of a line to one of 3 comparison lines. Easy task.
But they were in a room with actors.
Right. Actors who were instructed to deliberately give the wrong answer on most trials.
And the results, they're famous, but still kind of shocking.
They really are. On average, participants conformed to the group's wrong answer. About a third of the time, 32%. And get this, 75%, 3/4 of participants, conformed at least once.
Only 25% consistently stuck to what they saw.
Only 25%. Many later said they knew the group was wrong, but just didn't want to stand out, didn't want to seem foolish. That's normative influence, conforming to be liked or accepted.
And others doubted themselves.
Yeah, others started to genuinely question their own eyesight because everyone else disagreed so confidently. That's informational influence conforming because you think others know better. Either way, resisting felt incredibly uncomfortable.
Okay, so that's peer pressure on something relatively harmless. But what about pressure to do something actually wrong?
Well, then you have Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments from the early 60s. These really shattered the idea that ordinary people wouldn't do terrible things just because they were told to.
This is the electric shock one, right?
That's the one. Participants were told they were teachers in a learning experiment. They had to deliver electric shocks to a learner, who was an actor, every time the learner got an answer wrong.
And the shocks increased in voltage.
All the way up to a level marked 450 volts, labeled XXX. The learner would scream, complain of a heart condition, eventually fall silent.
And the participants, they kept going.
The results were horrifying. 65%. Nearly 2/3 of the participants went all the way to the maximum 450 volts, even though they believed they could be seriously harming, maybe even killing the learner.
Even though they were distressed themselves.
Oh, absolutely. They were sweating, trembling, some were crying or laughing nervously. But when the authority figure in the lab code said, the experiment requires that you continue, most did.
And the justification.
They often shifted responsibility. I was just following orders. He told me to do it. Chillingly similar to excuses we hear from perpetrators of real-world atrocities.
It shows ordinary people
Can commit extraordinarily bad acts under the right kind of social pressure, particularly from authority.
So Asch is peer pressure, Milgram is authority. What about just falling into a role?
Then you have Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment in 1971. Psychologically stable college students, randomly assigned to be either prisoners or guards in a mock prison set up in a university basement.
And this one went off the rails fast, right?
Unbelievably fast. They had to stop it after only 6 days instead of the planned 2 weeks. The guards quickly became authoritarian, some even sadistic. The prisoners became passive, distressed, some had emotional breakdowns.
And nobody told them how to act.
No. They just slipped into these roles, seemingly drawing on stereotypes from movies, books, their own imagination about how guards and prisoners behave.
Within 2 days, some guards were already being abusive.
Shockingly quickly. It really highlighted how situations and expected role can overwhelm individual personality. It wasn't necessarily about bad apples, as Zimbardo argued, but maybe a bad barrel. A toxic situation and powerful role expectations can corrupt almost anyone.
Like Abu Ghraib later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That seemed to echo some of the dynamics seen in the Stanford experiment.
So putting these together, Asch, Milgram, Zimbardo, the takeaway is pretty stark.
It really is. The evidence suggests humans are fundamentally conformists. We yield to the group, to authority, to the roles we're assigned or adopt.
And we yield easily, sometimes at the cost of truth or even basic morality.
It's like we're running the script for that situation, almost like an NPC would.
Wow. Okay. If the classic psych experiments weren't unsettling enough, let's talk about now, the age of big data.
Right. Because now it's not just psychologists observing us in labs, it's algorithms observing everything we do online.
And it turns out even things we think are deeply personal, like our tastes or personality, they're incredibly predictable from just a few digital breadcrumbs.
It's quite remarkable. Your digital footprint, what you like on Facebook, what you search for, what you buy, seems trivial piece by piece, but put it all together.
It paints a detailed picture.
An incredibly detailed picture. There was a major study, Cambridge and Stanford, I think, that analyzed Facebook likes. Just likes.
And what could they predict?
Astounding things. With high accuracy, like 88% for a man's sexual orientation, 95% for distinguishing between black and white Americans, 85% for political leaning, 82% for religion.
Just from likes, not from asking questions.
Exactly. No direct questions, just patterns in what people liked. They could even guess if your parents were divorced with something like 60% accuracy.
That implies our choices aren't that unique then.
It implies that our choices fall into predictable clusters. If you like X, Y, and Z, you're highly likely to also like A, B, and C, and probably have demographic profile D, like an NPC profile almost. If you have trait A, you probably have B, C, and D too.
And it gets even more personal, right? Predicting personality.
This is the part that really blew my mind. With just around 70 Facebook likes, their computer model could judge your personality, based on the standard 5-factor model, as accurately as your close friends could.
Okay, that's impressive.
With 150 likes, it was more accurate than your family members. And with 300 likes, it was more accurate than your spouse.
Wait, better than your spouse? The person you live with?
Better than the person you live with. A machine analyzing your likes could apparently understand your core personality traits better than the person closest to you.
That is deeply unsettling.
It really makes you think about how much we reveal unintentionally and how pattern-based our personalities might actually be.
And how are these models used? Because that's the next question, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the answer is often for manipulation. Companies use them for targeted advertising, obviously, but political campaigns use them too. Remember Cambridge Analytica?
Oh, yeah.
The scandal? They use Facebook data to build psychological profiles and then target political ads designed to push specific emotional buttons based on people's inferred personalities and fears. Highly personalized, highly effective manipulation.
And this predictability isn't just online, is it?
Not at all. Even offline behavior is surprisingly regular. Studies using cell phone location data show that most people's movements are incredibly predictable. One study claimed over 90% accuracy in predicting where someone would be weeks in advance.
We're creatures of habit, basically clockwork.
To a large extent, yes.
Yeah.
And simple demographic profiling works too. Just knowing age, gender, income, education level allows fairly accurate predictions about voting habits, health risks, even taste in music. Why? Because statistically, people in those groups tend to behave similarly.
But someone might say, okay, I'm predictable, but I'm still making free choices.
And that's a fair point to raise. Predictability doesn't automatically equal zero free will. But the sheer weight of the evidence suggests that so many of our choices are heavily influenced, if not practically determined, by our context.
My taste in music, my politics, my job goals, they strongly correlate with my friends, family, community.
Right? Even who we fall in love with. It often follows predictable patterns. People tend to partner with others of similar background, education level. It's called assortative mating. Less random romance, more like predicts-like.
So we're all just running algorithms, programmed by evolution and our environment.
In a way, yes. Show any human an image of a cute, smiling baby, and the vast majority will feel a positive emotional response. That's a built-in evolutionary algorithm. Show people a social media post with tons of likes.
And they're more likely to like it too. Social proof.
Exactly. Even things we know are manipulative can still work, like sitcom laugh tracks. Research shows even if you know it's fake, you still tend to laugh more and rate the jokes as funnier when you hear that canned laughter. It's a social cue we can't easily ignore.
Maybe the most NPC-like behavior is how we handle information that challenges us.
Motivated reasoning, yes. Instead of objectively evaluating information that contradicts our deeply held beliefs, we tend to instinctively attack it, discredit the source, find any reason to reject it.
And we eagerly accept information that confirms what we already think.
Absolutely. Our beliefs often function more like badges of group identity than carefully reasoned conclusions. We protect the belief to protect our sense of belonging. That's very much like an NPC only processing lines of code that fit its existing program.
Okay, wow. After going through all of that, the experiments, the data, You might be feeling a bit, I don't know, depressed, maybe even offended.
Hey, I'm not a robot.
Exactly. Surely I'm more than just a conformist. And that reaction is totally natural. We all cherish the idea of ourselves as independent, free-thinking individuals.
Right. But the point of this deep dive isn't really to depress everyone. It's more to, well, maybe jolt us awake a bit. To recognize the invisible fences around our freedom.
You can't escape a prison if you don't know you're in one.
Precisely. By understanding all these ways our thoughts and actions get conditioned by culture, by peers, by authority, by algorithms, maybe we can gain a little bit of genuine autonomy, or at least gain some humility about how biased we all are.
Because true independence of thought, it sounds like it's incredibly difficult.
It is. It means constantly pushing back against both external pressures, what everyone else is doing or saying, and internal pressures, that ingrained desire to fit in, that fear of disapproval.
We make heroes out of people like Galileo or Rosa Parks because they were so rare, right? Most people at the time didn't support them initially.
Exactly. And they often paid a heavy price for their nonconformity.
And even when scripts change, they're still scripts.
Right. Society evolves, norms change, but there's still norms. The herd might change direction, but there's always a herd dynamic. Even the language we use, the very categories we think with, are given to us by society. They shape our thoughts before we even have them.
It's fascinating that even our basic perception can be swayed. You mentioned the neuroscience.
Yeah. If people around you insist a musical note is high-pitched, studies suggest you might actually hear it as higher than it objectively is. We don't always see or hear through our own senses, untainted.
It's that fish and water problem again.
Exactly. We're swimming in our cultural norms, and we rarely notice the water itself unless we encounter a very different culture or someone who drastically breaks the norms.
Like when you travel and realize something you thought was just normal is actually a specific local custom.
Right, like the source mentioning the pissed sound to get a waiter's attention in Brazil seems odd elsewhere. Totally normal there. It throws your own assumptions into relief.
So what's the bottom line? Are we just hopelessly unfree? Cogs in the machine?
Maybe not hopelessly, but
free.
Significantly constrained. Yes, the evidence points that way. Perhaps the freest we can actually be is to become aware of the strings.
Just knowing about conformity bias or internalized norms, that gives us a chance to catch ourselves?
It gives us a choice point. When you feel that pull to conform or that urge to obey or that sting of potential disapproval, if you recognize it as a programmed response, you then have a brief window to decide if you actually want to go along with it or if you want to act differently based on your own values or judgment.
So what really separates a player character from an NPC in this metaphor?
Maybe it's exactly that. Metacognition, the awareness of the programming, the ability and the willingness to question it. Most people, arguably, just run the scripts on autopilot their whole lives.
But someone listening to this, having thought about these ideas...
You're now armed with the knowledge of these tendencies. Does that make you immune? No, probably not completely. We're still human, still social.
But you might spot it sometimes.
You might. Maybe next time you find yourself agreeing with the popular opinion just because it's popular, you might pause and ask, wait, do I actually think this?
Or feel that cringe of embarrassment for saying something slightly different.
You might recognize it as that programmed fear of social disapproval and decide, nope, it's irrational, I'm going to say it anyway. Those are small moments, but they're moments of genuine agency.
So the title, Are You an NPC? It's provocative, meant to make us think, but it's not literal destiny.
Not destiny, no. We have consciousness. We have the capacity to reflect and change. The real challenge is trying to become the author of your own story, even within the constraints.
You can't rewrite the whole play.
Probably not. We need society, we need connection, but you can ad-lib. You can deliver a line differently. You can make choices that surprise the audience, maybe even surprise yourself.
And those moments when you act from your own conviction instead of social reflex.
Those moments prove you're more than just code. You're showing that even a conditioned human can rise above the script, at least sometimes. And honestly, in a world this predictable, that's kind of amazing.
That shock of realization, wow, I'm not nearly as free as I thought. It could go two ways. Despair or motivation.
Motivation to actively push against those boundaries. It doesn't have to be huge, like leading a protest, though it could be.
It could be personal, choosing a life path different from what everyone expected.
Exactly. Or intellectual, making a real effort to understand viewpoints you strongly disagree with, just to break out of your echo chamber.
Or social, genuinely connecting with people very different from you to challenge your own assumptions.
All these things take effort. They often involve discomfort. but they expand the part of you that isn't just reflecting your environment.
So maybe a totally unscripted human is impossible.
Perhaps. But a self-aware human, one who sees the social forces at play, that person is playing the game with their eyes open.
Less likely to be swept up by mobs or demagogues.
Less likely to participate in cruelty just because everyone's doing it. Less likely to miss out on their potential because they're afraid to be different. They might still follow norms sometimes, but it's a conscious choice, not just an automatic default.
So the question remains, are you an NPC? If you've never really wrestled with that question before,
then maybe, yeah, to a significant degree, you've been running on autopilot. But the very act of asking the question, of demanding evidence, of noticing the patterns in yourself and others,
that's the first step towards becoming more of a player.
It's stepping into that role, however slightly. But be ready sometimes. Seeing the strings isn't comfortable. You might not like realizing how much you've been influenced.
But seeing them is the prerequisite to maybe cutting a few.
Exactly. Even cutting one or two could make a huge difference. The difference between a life lived unconsciously and a life lived with conscious intention.
Knowledge is power, then.
In this fight for autonomy, knowledge is absolutely key. It's both armor and weapon. Knowing about these biases gives you a defense against them.
When the crowd sways, recognize the pull, then decide.
When authority commands, recognize the instinct to obey, then decide.
When that internal peanut gallery starts yelling,
recognize its voice for what it is, internalize social pressure, and decide whether its criticism is valid or just noise you can choose to ignore. Those decision points. Those are the moments where freedom flickers.